Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Walk and Talk, the dog training podcast designed to take the stress out of living your very best life with your dog by sharing all the industry insider tips, tricks, and useful slices of knowledge from a training and behavior expert with approximately 1,000 years of experience. No, I'm joking, I'm not that old, but I am at the age where I can vaguely say over a decade of experience. We can just leave it there for a few years. No one needs to ask any questions about how old I am. Can you tell my birthday is fast approaching? Actually, it might be. When is this going out? It might be my birthday today in real time when this episode goes out because I'm coming at you live and direct from the past. Anyway, we're not here to talk about my Botox. We are here to talk about dogs. And specifically, this week, I want to talk about the whole dog and the concept of the whole dog. And by that, I mean that phrase that if you've ever worked with a behaviorist, you've probably already heard that goes something along the lines of, we need to look at the whole dog, or we need to work with the dog in front of us. We need to look at the whole picture. What does that mean? How do we do it? And specifically, if we are trying to implement some kind of plan for behavior change, but perhaps you don't have the funds to work with a behaviorist right now, or you've just not been able to find the right fit of a person for you, how do we look at the whole dog, the whole picture, and break it down into segments of influence that we can realistically and practically make changes to in order to see real life results? Does that make sense? I'm not sure if that actually fully makes sense. Basically, today I want to explore with you how behaviorists actually think when they are faced with client behavior challenges, whether that is reactivity, anxiety, over-arousal, poor focus, maybe aggression, shutdown behavior, hyperactivity, whatever it is. And I want to gently but firmly dismantle the idea that behavior change is just about training exercises on their own and that's it. Because training exercises alone in isolation will rarely, if ever, deliver the lasting, truly lasting, deeply rooted change that you are really looking for with your dog. And I do know a lot more people these days are clued up and switched on and already understand this. I get that. But also, believe it or not, there are still loads of people who think that just basic obedience is a coverall plaster that you can just stick over everything. I had a client once, it was a long time ago, to be fair, donkey's years ago, and I can't remember specifically what the issue was that I was there for in the first place. But what I do remember is that as soon as I arrived at her house, her attitude was very much, right, hello, okay, I'll just hang on there a sec, I'll get my wellies on and we'll go straight out, we'll get on with it then. When in reality, what we needed to do was sit down at the kitchen table and have the longest chat in the world before we did anything about what was going on, what were the problems, what was the dog's current routine, their diet, their exercise, yada, 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 all of that stuff. We'll get into what all of those different things are over the course of this episode. But what I'm saying is, there is no real, let's just take any and every dog out into a field, teach them to sit, stay, come, and then that should perfect their behavior, box ticked. Because there are so many other influencing factors that we need to assess and tweak and rearrange, modify, maybe scrap all together, you name it, in order to deliver a proper and effective long-term solution. So, this episode is about all of those things that sit underneath training, the foundations, the context, the things that either make that training possible or silently and completely sabotage it. So, if you've ever felt like you're doing all of the right training things, you've done the puppy class, you got your certificate, you've got your obedience cues, you walk your dog every day, and yet your progress still feels slow or inconsistent or fragile, or maybe just it's not there at all, it's entirely non existent, this episode is one for you. We are going to behaviorist the hell out of your dog today, okay? And we're going to do it together. So, first of all, when behaviorists assess a dog, we are not starting with what cue should we teach or train to solve this issue, or what technique should we apply here. We start at the beginning by zooming right out and we look at the dog's entire life picture because behavior does not exist in a vacuum. I'm sure I've said that before. It's an expression of your dog's nervous system, their physical state, their emotional history, the learning experiences that they've already been through, the environment they grew up in, potentially other environments they've been exposed to along the way, the environment they live in, obviously, their relationships, all of these influencing factors all interacting at once. Behavior is basically the uh, perceivable output of everything that is happening internally and externally for your dog. And when we try to change behavior without understanding and adjusting the bigger picture, what we can inadvertently end up doing is asking a dysregulated, uncomfortable, overwhelmed, or under resourced dog to perform coping strategies they simply don't have access to yet. So, let's walk through the key areas behaviorists consider when it comes to painting the whole picture. Now, the first place we almost always start, and I'm struggling off the top of my head to think of an example of any time we wouldn't start here, is physical health. So why? Why is this pretty much always the first line of questioning? Well, it's because pain, discomfort, illness, any kind of physiological imbalance, these are some of the most powerful drivers of behavior change. And they are also some of the most frequently missed because, generally speaking, dogs do not show pain the way humans do. It's not something that we are used to. They don't limp dramatically about the place. Although, to be fair, I did actually once have a dog who did limp dramatically about the place because he had a luxating patella. God rest his soul. He had a dodgy knee. But generally speaking, your dog will tolerate a surprising amount of pain before they communicate any kind of discomfort whatsoever to you. Dogs are incredibly unlikely to cry out in pain the way we do unless that pain is really severe. They're not likely to just refuse a walk or not fetch the ball or whatever it is that you ask of them physically. Instead, pain often shows up as just constant irritability or reactivity or a reduced tolerance, avoidance, aggression, shutdown, or just a sudden change in behavior, whatever that sudden change is, that just feels out of character to you because you know your dog. You're like, oh God, they've never done this before. Now they've started acting like this. It's totally out of the blue. It's really strange. And chronic pain in particular, things like joint discomfort, spinal pain, dental pain is a really common one that gets missed. Gastrointestinal discomfort, ear issues, maybe like mites or an infection, skin conditions. Believe me when I say that all of this creates a constant background stressor on the nervous system of your dog. And that stress lowers thresholds, it reduces resilience, and it makes the whole world feel less predictable and less safe. That super friendly Labrador who has suddenly, out of nowhere, started baring his teeth at the grandchildren when they get close, even though he's never showed aggression like that before, is a prime candidate for a serious exploration of potentials like joint pain or gastro pain or something else physical, because not only is he generally feeling just more irritable and he has less range, but also those grandchildren, they move really quickly and unpredictably because that is just how children are, right? And he is now really trying to protect his physical space because if he gets knocked or trodden on or whatever, he knows it's going to hurt 10 times more than it used to. And from a neurobiological perspective, pain sensitizes the amygdala, and this is the part of the brain involved in threat detection, or the part of the brain that you will have heard me lovingly refer to as Captain Panic in many a previous episode. Good old Captain Panic. So that means a dog in pain is more likely to perceive possibly completely neutral or mildly challenging stimuli as more threatening. So, again, those unpredictable grandkids running around the place or that other dog across the park that's bowling towards them, that might not have stressed them out previously. They might have been cool with that, but now their threat response system is hypersensitive. So, training a dog in this state without identifying and addressing that pain is like trying to teach someone new skills while an alarm is just constantly blaring in the background. It's just not going to land. They're not going to be able to absorb that, and it's certainly not going to stick. So, behaviorists will usually start by asking detailed questions about your dog's movement, maybe their posture, their sleep pattern, their appetite, their toileting, their tolerance for petting and grooming and being picked up and things like that. And if there have been any subtle changes over time with any of those. And very often, the most ethical and effective first step is just a referral to a vet. And if not a vet, I highly, highly recommend looking up a good physio, because now please don't take this, by the way, as vet bashing, because of course there are thousands of incredible vets in the world. 100%, there are so many good ones, but sometimes, just sometimes, the odd vet can be a little bit too quick to dismiss an owner's concerns about pain or discomfort, um, unless the dog is literally like walking into the examination room with a leg missing or something ridiculous. Whereas I tend to find that physios, they're just so impressive and so thorough at rooting out the most obscure musculoskeletal issues or injuries that might otherwise get missed. That is just my personal experience. Obviously, for any and all medical concerns, get your dog to the vet 100%, always. Always get them to the vet first. But if your vet gives your dog a clean bill of health and you're just still not satisfied with your dog's gait or their posture, or something just feels off, remember, you know your dog. Don't dismiss the idea of going for a second checkup at the physio. Any good physio will be absolutely happy to see you, even if it's just to put your mind at ease. Because ultimately, any kind of behavior modification built on an uncomfortable body is going to be unstable. Whereas if you discover that there is pain present and you are then able to relieve that pain, behavior often softens dramatically and quite quickly as a result of that. So please, please, please don't just blanket rule out that initial health check. We bring it up for really good reason. Okay. Okay. So let's move on then to physical health specimate, who goes by the name of diet and nutrition. Now, before we get into this, I'm just going to say I'm not a medical or health practitioner when it comes to dogs, right? I'm an expert in behavior, and alongside that, there is a certain amount of knowledge required to cover health and wellness and diet. But no, I am not a vet. That said, none of us need to be a vet to accept that we all already know that what a dog eats affects their gut. And if you have a dog with a particularly sensitive digestion, you will know this all the more. But hopefully, that is not really news to any of us, vets or non vets. But what might be news to some of you is that the gut plays a profound role in mood, arousal, and emotional regulation. The gut brain axis is not just a piece of fluffy wellness made up nonsense. It is well established in the world of neuroscience that a dog experiencing gastrointestinal discomfort, food sensitivities, blood sugar instability, or some kind of nutrient deficiency or imbalance may appear restless or anxious or more reactive or unable to settle or just generally out of sorts. And it's not just down to what a dog eats, although that's obviously really important and the best place to start. But behaviorists will also consider Things like how often a dog eats, in what format the food comes, how it's delivered, and factors like how predictable meals are, what the routine is. We will look at whether that food is supporting stable energy levels or like creating these crazy spikes and crashes. And we'll consider whether food is contributing maybe to inflammation, which again feeds into pain and the increased potential for the emotional volatility that comes as a result of that. Now, just going ahead and improving your dog's diet isn't going to magically fix a big behavior issue. Of course, it isn't. But it can dramatically lower the baseline stress level of the dog's system. And when the baseline drops, learning becomes easier. And so you can think of optimizing your dog's diet as like clearing the runway, right? For the training plan that is then going to follow. Greasing the wheels, laying the foundations, whatever, pick your metaphor, they all work for this. And if exploring an alternative diet for your dog is something you are interested in right now, I can highly recommend a fresh food brand you may not have even heard of. They are called Wilson's, and if you haven't heard of them, I beg of you, just go and Google them. I don't need to wax lyrical. Just go and Google them. Go and check out their Instagram. They make the most fantastic quality fresh dog food. It's gently steam cooked. It's cooked and then sealed up, so you don't even have to like freeze it or keep it in the fridge. It is full of vitamins and minerals, amino acids, pre and postbiotics, and the ingredients list is just fucking incredible. Albie eats it and he absolutely loves it. And I do have a discount link that you can use to get 20% off, which I will make sure is in the show notes of this show because Wilson's did reach out to me and ask if I wanted to work with them as an ambassador. Full transparency. But know this, and hopefully you already do know this about me, but I'm going to say this anyway. I'm not trying to sell you this food because I'm affiliated. I am affiliated because this food truly is excellent. I have over 100,000 followers on Instagram now, right? Which I am so incredibly grateful for. But you better believe that because of that, I get brands in my DMs all the time. All the time asking me to talk about their product or send me something in exchange for me saying, I think this thing is great, or get an affiliate connection or post a video or whatever. And I've had multiple food brands do this. I won't say who they are because I'm not trying to bash anyone. That's not my vibe. But I promise you, I have turned down every other food brand until now because I won't tell you that I think something is good if I don't think it's good. Like if I wouldn't give it to my dog, I'm never going to tell you to give it to your dog just so I can make 50p off the sale of it or whatever. Do you know what I mean? I don't need 50p that badly. So I'm going to stop going on about Wilson's now. Honestly, if you're interested, if you want to explore a fresh food diet, I implore you to check out the link in the show notes. Just have a read through of their website yourself. I think the range they offer is absolutely fantastic. And if you want to give it a go, you can start by just using it as a food topper and just mixing it in with your dog's existing food if you want to. It's a really cost-effective way of trying something new. And it's a fantastic way to start up leveling your dog's dinner bowl one step at a time if you think that making a change in that area of your dog's life is going to be beneficial to you and is something that you want to explore. Anyway, right, let's move on to the next pillar, which is another super important one, and that is rest and sleep. And if you are still in the puppyhood era of your relationship with your dog, oh boy, do you need to make sure you have got their rest and their sleep nailed, because those little T-Rexes without enough sleep, honestly, you don't want to be living with that. But truth be told, it's not just puppies who struggle with this. I mean, really, a lot of modern dogs are chronically underrested, okay? Because these days we've got them living in these crazy, overstimulating environments. There's busy households. A lot of them have more inconsistent routines now than they ever did. There's a lot of novelty, and all of this is just preventing our dogs from getting deep restorative rest. And sleep is really important because sleep is when the nervous system processes stress hormones. It's when learning consolidates and it's when emotional regulation is restored. So, a dog who is overtired, and I think I talked about this a couple of episodes back actually, but a dog who is overtired does not then by default become really calm just because they're exhausted, but they actually become like wired. They become more reactive and more impulsive, which is why most behaviorists will often prioritize rest protocols pretty early on in a lot of behavior plans. And that just looks like often increasing downtime, creating safe sleep spaces, reducing any unnecessary stimulation, and sometimes actively teaching dogs how to rest, which can involve a bit of active training on the owner's part, but it's totally worth it because, again, you cannot train self control into a system that is just constantly running on empty. So, that said, let's look at the flip side then and talk about exercise for a second, because this is so often where things get misunderstood. Because exercise is not just about burning energy, but rather the type, the quality, and the predictability of exercise matter far more than quantity, really. And this is because high adrenaline, repetitive, overstimulating exercise can actually increase arousal and reactivity in some dogs. So, long ball throwing sessions, frantic chasing and running around, or chaotic dog to dog interactions at the dog park, they may create fitter dogs, but they are also incredibly likely to create dogs with less emotional regulation, not more. So instead, we need to look at whether exercise meets the dog's species needs, their breed tendencies, and also does it suit their individual nervous system or not. So we consider whether movement is calming or arousing for the dog, whether it provides agency and choice, and whether it allows the dog to decompress, or actually whether it's doing completely the opposite. And if you want to dive more into the ins and outs of all the different types of exercise and breed specific exercises and activities, please do go back through the podcast and listen to those older episodes on those topics, because you'll hopefully find some really useful information in those. But overall, I think the important takeaway to remember is that the goal of exercise is not just complete exhaustion. It's never that. Of course, our dogs need movement. They need loads of movement. Of course, they need to burn energy and they need to do lots of things, but we never want them to get home at the end of it all in a completely wild and unregulated state, because I mean that's getting you nowhere long term. Okay? Um, Another enormous factor for your dog's behavior is your dog's environment. So, dogs living in unpredictable, noisy, visually busy, or constantly changing environments, these dogs are under a persistent cognitive and emotional load. And things like, urban living, shared spaces, having a lack of retreat areas like an open crate or a quiet room that's not going to be disturbed, and constant exposure to triggers like doorbells, boisterous children, visual distractions at windows, persistent external noise distractions, all of these things can contribute to cumulative stress. So sometimes really small environmental tweaks and changes, like adding visual barriers to certain windows or doors that the dog can see through, maybe rearranging a couple of things to create quieter routines, setting up one or two sacred, totally protected rest areas, can contribute significantly to behavioral improvements for that dog going forward. Because the thing about safety is it's not really a feeling that we can train, but it's a state of being that has to be set up or created or facilitated in order for us to achieve success with our dogs. Now, something else that's going to help with that massively is routine and predictability. Predictability massively reduces cognitive load for dogs. It allows the nervous system to just relax, because essentially, dogs who don't know when they'll be walked, if they'll be walked, even, or fed, or rested, or interacted with, are basically constantly kind of scanning their environment for information. And that scanning ends up looking like hypervigilance, reactivity, a total inability to ever really settle down, which ironically are all things that we as owners don't really want from our dogs, do we, when we're just trying to chill out at home, right? So, a decent behaviorist will come along and help you to create a rhythm that allows your dog to anticipate their day a bit better. And that doesn't mean that it has to be a totally rigid schedule, but it just needs to be like a reliable pattern. So, for example, right, my dog's morning meal, their breakfast, is not delivered at any specific time of day. It's not like 7 a.m., that's when the bowls hit the ground, but it will always come after I'm up and showered and dressed and before I leave the house. So they know that that window of time is when they're going to eat their first meal. There will always be a morning walk, but sometimes it's at 8:30 in the morning, sometimes it's 10:30, sometimes it's 11 o'clock, whatever. But there will always be a morning walk. It's that kind of thing, right? When the brain doesn't have to work so hard to predict what's coming, it has more capacity to learn. And that's what we're ultimately trying to set up. So, then we come to relationships. Now, dogs are social mammals, so their behavior is deeply shaped by their attachment relationships with humans and with the other animals in the household. So that means that inconsistent responses or unclear boundaries or emotional volatility, or an intense amount of pressure to perform, all of these things can create confusion and insecurity. It's really common that in a multi human household, it can end up being really tricky for the dog because you'll have one person that lets the dog do certain things, or maybe even encourages it and praises it because they like it, like hopping up on the furniture or letting the dog jump up at them. Whereas the other person actively scolds that very same behavior because they don't like it, they don't want it. And so there's a lot of daily confusion going on for the dog. And it's also important to look at how the individual dog and human relationship flows in every case with every human in the household. So, are the dog's signals and social cues being noticed and respected? And this is a really important piece to consider if you have children in your home, but it absolutely applies to adults too. Just because a dog might tolerate something, are we watching what they communicate and respecting that communication? Maybe your dog actually doesn't like having their feet touched or being squashed by the toddler or being pat on the head every time you walk past them. Don't get me wrong though, some dogs like that stuff. Some dogs love that stuff. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying remember that communication and tolerance flow in both directions in a relationship. So if it's okay for you to say no and push your dog down whenever they jump up at you because you don't like that, it's also only fair that you watch for how your dog responds every time you try to interact with them in a physical way and you notice what's cool and maybe what is actually stressing them out. Because a dog who feels heard and understood never needs to shout. They never need to escalate their communication. Okay, so this is a really important one to consider. So now let's move on to your dog's learning history. And we need to genuinely consider, what has this dog learned works for them? So, what gets them what they want? And what has been punished or ignored or reinforced, whether that is intentionally or not. What are all of the learning outcomes that your dog already has banked? Because ultimately, dogs will always repeat behaviors that meet their needs. So if barking creates distance and distance is what they wanted, barking will continue. If shutting down stops the pressure that they weren't enjoying, shutdown becomes a strategy. And understanding that learning history allows us to change behavior ethically by changing those outcomes rather than just suppressing the expression in the first place. So you could, if you wanted to, put an e-collar on a dog who barks and just zap them every time they bark until the barking stops. If you were a basic bitch who didn't really have any other knowledge or skill set to call upon, you could do that. There are so many reasons why I would never recommend that you do that. But this isn't an episode about e-collars. let me know if you want that episode, by the way. I'm happy to talk more about it, but I think there is actually a lot to talk about. Um, so alternatively then, if we're not going to do that, which we're definitely not, we could instead look at the situation, assess the outcome we think the barking delivers, and then we could either play around with that outcome, or we could meet that unfulfilled need and deliver that outcome by other more palatable means. So we either take the barking and we make it ineffective, or we make it unnecessary. But we don't need to make it painful. And the ways you might go about doing that vary greatly, of course, depending on the dog, the situation, the history, etc. But you get the point I'm making. There are so many options available to stop that barking from happening if you know what you're looking for and what you're doing. So, finally, then, once we've got all of those factors in the bank, then we can layer on the training. But when I say training in this sense, through a behaviorist lens, I'm not necessarily talking about a whole load of obedience, although there might be some obedience, there might be loads. But really, I'm talking about skill building. So we teach dogs how to cope. We teach them how to regulate. We provide them with different choices and new tools and strategies that they can lean on when their nervous system is capable of doing so. And training layered onto a well supported dog is then really, really powerful compared to training layered onto a dysregulated dog who is struggling with all kinds of things. That's really fragile, and that's why you're not getting results. So if you take one thing from today's episode, which is, oh my goodness, already very long, let it be this: when behavior feels really tricky and like you're not getting anywhere, just zoom out. Ask yourself what the dog's life is asking of them. Ask what state their nervous system is in. Ask what foundations need strengthening. Because when you support the whole dog, the whole picture, behavior change stops being a battle and it really starts to become a collaboration. And you will be amazed at the progress you can make once you've begun by optimizing those underlying factors. So, I hope today's episode has been helpful. I would love to know which area you think you could easily find some changes or improvements to be made, whether that is just a vet visit to discuss that slight little limp that crops up on walks, or the window film that you're going to add to the front room window to stop your dog constantly barking at the neighbours, or the tweaks you're going to make to your dog's diet or their daily routine. Every single tiny action is a brick in the wall of your behavior success story, and I promise you, there is no tweak too small that it's not worth doing. If you can identify it, see if you can improve it. That's what I say, and see where that takes you. Okay? Right. It is definitely about time I loved you and left you to enjoy the rest of your dog walk or whatever it is that you're up to right now. So I will bid you farewell. If you need me, I'm at Listen Dog Training on Instagram and TikTok. I always love to hear from you. Speaking of which, actually, I have to tell you. Am I allowed to tell you this now? Well, I have started now, so I'm going to. I am working on something very exciting for you all that will arrive, hopefully, this is my plan, at the end of February. I won't say more than that because I'm recording in the past and I'm not sure how much I've already said or not said in the real world, so I won't say anything more than that. So if you're not already following me, come and find me and hit follow so you can be the first to get involved when that top secret thing finally arrives at the end of the month. I'm sure I'll be talking about it more in the coming weeks. It's a very exciting project that I have been mulling over for a long time, and I just thought, I think 2026 is the year now. Anyway, I was going to go, wasn't I? And you're wondering why I'm still here. So I will go now. I am going now. And I will see you same time next week for another episode of The Walk and Talk.